Welcome to Character in Action from the 7 Degrees of Change Foundation. I'm Matthew J. Norcross here at beautiful Cumberland Yards in High Point, North Carolina. This week, my guest is Bert Giles. He is the youth minister at University City United Methodist Church in Charlotte. But before that, he was the youth minister at another Methodist congregation, Wesley Memorial, here in High Point. He has been in church ministry for over 30 years, most of which includes leading and working with teenagers. He joins us right here in the studio. Bert, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, man, thanks. I appreciate you having me, inviting me. I've listened to a few of your other podcasts and some of your guests, and you have had some important people, some powerful people. So I feel a little bit out of my element, but I'm excited to be here. I've never done anything like this before, so we're going to see how it goes and what happens.
All right. So you're here because you're a living example of character in action. Now, before we get started, can you tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, so I don't know about it being a living example or being great about that, but I do try to kind of live my life in ways that it would be a good influence, to be a person of good character, at least how I understand that. And also, just to give you a little bit more background on me, I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, born and raised there, spent the majority of my life there, about 50 years or so have been there. I've worked in a few other places since then. I actually worked here in High Point for a while, for about 5 years at Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church. And over the last, something that's really been important to me and that I've been doing a lot of work around or trying to understand and do better with in my own life over the last probably 6 or 7 years is around around racial healing and reconciliation. And so I've done a lot of that, a lot of reading, kind of trying to self-educate, but also spending time with people of color, especially some African-American men from another church right down the street from mine, just trying to understand that we're not always as different as everybody tries to make us out to be, right? We all want a lot of the same things. So that's kind of what I've been doing. I'm married to my wife, Megan. We've been married for a little over 9 years, and we're still living in Charlotte right now.
Yeah, Charlotte's a cool place. I've been there many times. Yeah,
it is growing. As we were talking about earlier, more than 100 people a day are moving into the Charlotte area. So it is not the same city that I grew up in, but it's a good place.
Yeah, it really is. So how do you define character?
So I think it's not tough. I think for me, like I said, I've listened to your podcast on some other people, guests, and a lot of them have talked about it being, who you are when nobody else is looking or nobody else is watching. And I think I kind of agreed with that to some degree. I think if you were to go to the dictionary and look that up, you would know, or you would see that it, to some shape or form, it talks about the mental, the moral, and the ethical qualities and abilities of someone, right? And how those qualities and abilities, how they guide and they influence someone's behaviors, how they think, how they feel, how they interact with other people. For me, I think it can go a couple of different ways. I've always grown up and working in the church for such a long time. I've always tried to let Scripture be one of those things that guides me. And so in the book of Romans chapter 5, it talks about that suffering or difficulties, they produce perseverance, and perseverance then produces character, right?
Right.
And then character then produces hope. And that hope does not disappoint, because what happens is when we have that hope, it allows God's love to come into our life through the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And if we allow the Holy Spirit to guide us, and our character can be strengthened, and we're able to have that hope for things that are to be better. So that's why I've tried to do that. On the flip side, it can go in another direction. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, it talks about that bad company can corrupt good character.
Right.
And so we have to be really careful about who it is that we allow into our lives, who we spend our time with, and how we let them influence us.
Yeah. Having good role models is a good example of, being influenced by someone with good character, because you want a good role model, good character, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, one that's been really important in my life is I'm really, really big on personal responsibility,
Mhm.
basically taking responsibility for my own actions, the things
Right.
that I say, the things that I do, and also trying to be somebody that can be counted on.
And I'm actually going to ask you about responsibility in a bit. But
Okay.
first, I want you to tell us a story of witnessing either in person or in history, someone that was a true phoenix, someone that was a role model, that was leading by example and making the world a better place for you.
So I was thinking about this. I knew you were going to ask me this question. I love that how you can be a phoenix or somebody being a phoenix when we talked about that. And so I want to give you two examples.
Mhm.
First one, really quick, kind of, not necessarily in history because they're still living, but Jimmy Carter to me is
Carter.
someone because, he's one of our U.S. presidents, but I think he's really more well known for the work that he did through Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
Building homes, inspiring other people, helping people get out of poverty, have a good place that they can live,
Mhm.
making that possible, but inspiring tens of thousands of other people to do the same thing by being servant leaders. So I think that's one. And then a personal one for me is a lady named Deborah Phillips. She is a lady that I know in Charlotte, North Carolina, and she has started a homeless ministry called Block Love Charlotte.
Interesting.
And she used to work downtown, like in one of the big corporate buildings and stuff down there. And every day going back and forth to work, she would see people who were homeless and she would see the things that they were going through. And she just felt like God was leading her to make a difference in their lives. And so at one point, because she had at one point also kind of been in a situation very similar where she needed help from somebody. Raising a couple of kids by herself. So she got help, she got on her feet, and then she was doing really well. So she wanted to be able to give back. So long story short, she ended up quitting that job, using her own savings, and starting this ministry called Block Love Charlotte. And I met her during 2020 when the pandemic hit. And what had happened is when that happened, all of the shelters that were helping people and housing people and feeding people shut down.
Wow.
So her and her team that she had built, at that point, they were going downtown every Sunday morning, and they would feed people or whatever they had, if they had clothing or hygiene items or whatever to give away. But they were really just getting to know people, spending time with them. What's going on with you? What are your needs? They didn't assume that they knew what people needed. And when those shelters shut down, Deb and her team, they started feeding every single night, feeding dinner every single night, and 3 meals a day on the weekends. And people were just bringing them donations and resources and money and food and all these things. And they have continued to do that. They feed every single night at 5:30 in downtown Charlotte. And then it has expanded. They've got a day center. They've helped probably several dozen people actually get housing to go through that process. So it's just amazing what they've been doing. So she would be my Phoenix person that I've gotten to know in the last few years.
Yeah, it sounds like an amazing person.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's awesome.
Now, the third standard question I'm going to ask you is, I'd like you to share a moment that stands out in your mind, something big or even the slightest gesture that was a transformative Phoenix moment, one where you knew you had a significant impact on an individual's life or on a group of people.
So it's hard for me to talk about me having that influence on somebody else's life. I hope that through ministry and doing that and through doing mission projects all over the country and all over the world, I've had that with people. For me, I want to basically share a little bit about someone who kind of had that moment for me in my own life, and then it had the ripple effect to have impact on lots of others. So for me, that person who's kind of been that in my life, that role model, that Phoenix person in my life, is a man named Chuck Wilson, who you know.
Yes.
You do know Chuck. Chuck was here in High Point at Wesleyan Memorial United Methodist Church for 6 or 7 years. I met Chuck in 1996. He came to my home church in Charlotte in University City. I was not in ministry at that point in time. I had been out of ministry for 5 or 6 months. My dad had cancer. I was helping take care of him through his end-of-life transition. He had passed away just a few weeks before Chuck got to our church. And he found out that I had done youth ministry before. The church was growing. They were looking to kind of revamp and restart and renew their youth ministry. And so he asked me about maybe coming and helping and volunteering. But he really just kind of sought me out. He mentored me. He challenged me. He pushed me to have excellence in everything that I did. He invested his time and his energy in me. And he just really has been a part of my life ever since, 1996, so almost 30 years now. I worked for him at 2 different churches, and in 2015, he was the best man in my wedding. So, yeah, he was my guy. And then from that, the influence that he had in me, bringing me back into ministry, I feel like I've been able to influence a lot of other people. So he even has some impact in all those other people, you of which were one of those.
Yeah, Chuck Wilson, he's an incredible man.
Yeah,
He really
absolutely.
is. So let's move on to the traits.
Okay.
And the first trait, I promised to get to responsibility, but first I want to ask about respect.
Okay.
Now, this is a crucial trait in business and in life. And my question to you is, how do you think we can rekindle the trait of respect today?
So I think for me, respect in and of itself, it's that admiration that we have for somebody, right? Based on their qualities, their abilities, maybe achievements they've had. Sometimes we respect people from a distance that we don't really know, but we just see what they've done, maybe a politician, a sports figure or somebody like that. And then some people that are close to us, right? And we respect them because we see their daily life, their daily walk, and what they do. It's interesting. I've worked with young people for a long time, and sometimes you will hear, especially from younger people, they will say, in order to have my respect, you've got to earn my respect first, right? It's not something I'm just going to give. Whereas I was coming along when I was younger, we just kind of automatically, especially to older folks, we just gave them a certain level of respect, right? Unless they did something that we were like, hey, that's not right or whatever. But we gave that to them right off the bat. And I don't see that necessarily happening a lot anymore. For me, again, I would have to say kind of that gets back for me. That great example for me has been my mom. My mom loved me. She raised me. She challenged me. She pushed me. She provided for me. But my mom also disciplined me. She was not afraid to whip my tail when my tail needed to be whipped. And she also taught me to take responsibility for myself, for my own words and for my own actions. She set this great example for me of how to serve other people, help other people, begin to know other people, treat people the way they should be treated.
Right.
But she said to me, you got to be who you say you are, and you got to do what you say you're going to do. And I think it's trying to get people to understand that. But I think in today's society, again, it's not just going to happen because we've gone over that line, right? We now have to earn that respect from people before we're going to get that respect. And that's a hard thing, I think.
Yeah. And it goes back to this mission statement that, well, it's not a mission statement. It's actually a motto for Phoenix Academy where I work. It's called treat people as if they were what they ought to be, and you help them become what they are capable of becoming. Yeah. And that is an ages old saying, and it's especially true today, don't you?
Yeah, I believe that. I think I've heard that in one of your other podcasts, and I resonated with that. I thought it was good.
Yeah. So finally we can talk about responsibility. So my question to you about this trait is, being a youth pastor, as long as you have, that's a big responsibility. And my question is, how have you managed that big of a task for that long?
In doing ministry?
Correct.
So, so I've been in ministry, since the early 90s. It seems like a long time.
Yeah.
And I think, again, a lot of it comes back to doing what you say you're going to do. So responsibility is being in charge of or being accountable for someone or for something, right? And again, as I was saying earlier, I'm really big on personal responsibility, on that fact of taking responsibility or accountability for my own words and for my own actions. But I think that especially when you're in ministry, you also have to think about the people that aren't there yet. Right. The people that aren't around, sometimes not even born yet. I'll give you an example of that, a couple of examples. One, I use the example sometimes of this older gentleman, maybe in his 70s. He's out in the field somewhere and he's planting trees, right? And somebody comes up to him and says, man, it's going to take forever for these trees to grow, for you to either cut them down and build something out of them, or for you to to sit under their shade or something like that. So why are you doing this? You probably only got another 10, 15 years at the most. And the old man looks at him and he points across the field at his 5-year-old grandson. And he goes, I'm not planting them for me, I'm planting them for him and for his kids and for his grandkids. And I think that's a part of that responsibility also. It's not just about me and what's best for me and those that are closest to me, but sometimes it's about those that are they're not even around yet. My dad, when the church that we were at in Charlotte, we were closing the church that I had grown up in and moving out to a new area of growth area in Charlotte where the conference wanted to put a church. And as we were getting ready to build the sanctuary, my dad died at 53 when he had cancer. And this was, he was probably in his early 50s, and we already knew he had cancer. It probably wasn't going to be around a whole lot longer. But he was an advocate for making sure that we got that church built. Right. And I remember somebody saying to him, John, why are you pushing so hard for this? And they said, you probably won't even be around, And he said, but there are going to be hundreds and thousands of people that are going to move to this area of Charlotte. And we were in a great place. We were between I-77 and I-85. We were out near the UNCC, the college, and near IBM headquarters. He said, there are going to be all these people moving to this area, and they're going to need a place to go to church where they can meet God. Right. And that's who we're doing it for. We're not even really doing it for ourselves. And sure enough, there's probably 1,000 people that joined our church over those next 10 years, even after he passed away. But he was already thinking about those that were not there yet. So that's part of being responsible. And I think in ministry, it's the same way, right? We're always trying to think of those people who are not there yet.
Right. Yeah. So the next trait I'm going to talk to you about today, I won't really have time to get to all of them, unfortunately, in this episode. But the next trait I'm going to talk about
is it because I talk too much, Matt?
Well,
sorry about that.
It's the trait I want to talk about next is trustworthiness.
Okay.
Now, I've told many of my guests that the trait of trustworthiness is sadly a lost art, and this is true especially in our government and in our institutions. It's both sides. So, how do you define and live out trustworthiness, and more importantly, how do you instill it in others?
So trustworthiness, I think, is one of those things. To me, someone who is trustworthy, they're honest, they're truthful, they're sincere, and they can be counted on, right? They can be counted on to get the job done. They're not going to drop the ball easily. They're not going to give up easily. They're going to follow through on what needs to be done. And I find this one difficult in my own life. I many times would just prefer to do my own thing or do whatever needs to be done as opposed to turning something over, trusting somebody else to get something done, right? And the reason being is because I think our society teaches us to be self-centered.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's you hear things like you better look out for number one, take care of yourself first. You better get yours because I'm going to get mine. And in some ways, I understand that. Like we have to be responsible for our own spiritual, physical, and mental health. We got to do what we need to do to be healthy in those areas. But I find that very, much less do people look out for what's best for everybody else from that particular situation. And we're also quick to blame others.
Oh
right?
Yeah.
And what happens, I feel like, is we don't teach people to do hard things anymore or to stay the course. If something's difficult, we just allow and say, okay, well, just quit. You don't want to waste your time doing that. But if we stick with things, if we stick with the hard things, we push through or we persevere to the end, as we were talking about earlier from Scripture, and we persevere and we get to the end, then we can reap the reward. And what is that reward? Right. Once we've persevered, it's a stronger character and a renewed hope. Right. And when we have that hope again, we're not going to be disappointed. And so I think in order to be able to do that, though, we have to mentor other people. We have to teach people individually. We have to set that example for them and know that I may not be able to influence everybody, but can I influence one person? Right. And I think that's how we're able to get that. And we have to be consistent. That's another thing. We got to be consistent. People, you can't be trying to teach somebody about trustworthiness and you say one thing, but then you do something else.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the next trait I want to talk about is caring. Now, my question to you about this trait is, how do you demonstrate caring as a youth minister, and how do you demonstrate in your personal life?
Yeah, so I think caring is simply showing kindness and concern for others, right?
Right.
And this is one that I think some people do much better than others.
Right.
And I would say that I'm not always one of the ones that does it really well. But I do think that we can learn to be more caring. And that's what I tried to do over my life. And we have to be intentional and purposeful to think about putting other people's needs, to think about their needs and think about what it is that will help them, right? As opposed to just, again, only what it is that we need. Because again, this is what society teaches us, but it's also our natural human inclination, right?
Right.
A baby cries when it needs something, it wants something, it's not thinking about anybody else. Children almost always are going to try and do something that's more self-centered or something like that. And they have to be taught that we got to think about others, we got to do
Everything's about you.
Right. And so for me, this is not something, I do find that, especially from my faith perspective, when I'm trying to think of what's best for others, trying to do what's best for others, I'm an easier person to be around.
Oh, yeah.
But it doesn't come naturally for me. And I will say it particularly does not come naturally for me when I'm in bad traffic.
Right.
I'm always thinking about what I want instead of what that person who's trying to cut me off wants. So I have to a lot of times ask for forgiveness when I'm in those bad traffic situations. I'm not very caring in those situations.
Yeah, incredibly easy to, it's incredibly easy whenever you're in traffic to want to lash out at the traffic that you're.
Absolutely to that other person, because they're trying to be selfish too. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the next trait I'm going to ask you about is citizenship.
Okay.
Now, my question is, what do you think it means as a youth minister, as a person of faith, to be a good citizen?
Yeah. So I think citizenship is just this awareness or this understanding that I'm part of something that's bigger than myself, right? And so whether that's from like being a part of a church, being a part of a neighborhood, being a part of your religion, your faith, whatever it is, the entire country, right? It's being part of something that's bigger than yourself, but it's also taking that responsibility, as we talked about earlier, for not only yourself, but for the greater good or the people that are around. I heard somebody say one time that citizenship, or a person who has good citizenship, they are collaborative, they are communicative, and they are constructive, right?
Right.
Basically meaning they're willing to work with other people, they're willing to communicate, on how they do that, and they're willing to work for or engage in the good of the entire community, and at least work with those people, even though they might not always agree with what somebody else thinks. They're willing to try to work towards a solution that would be best for everybody. Again, whatever their situation is, if it's an HOA in a neighborhood, if it's a team that you're a part of, if it's your workplace, if it's two different sides of the government trying to come together, whatever it is, right, in your own church, but that you're willing to work together to do those. And I think even in ministry, we have to kind of be able to try and figure that out, because everybody's not going to be in the same place in their faith walk, but what can we do that's going to help everybody grow and get to that place of knowing God and growing in their faith.
Right. So the last trait I'm going to ask you about today is empathy.
Okay.
Now, how do you believe people across the state and across the country as a whole should demonstrate empathy? And in your case, how do you demonstrate it as a youth minister?
So I won't necessarily say from a youth ministry, but I'll share from a personal standpoint, if that's okay. So empathy, I think, is just trying to see what someone else is going through. Like sympathy is that thing you just feel bad for somebody, or you have some care for people. But empathy is trying to put yourself in their shoes, put yourself in their place, and actually see how they feel, right? And see what they're going through. And again, this is a tough one for me, because myself and you and everybody else, we see life through our own personal lens, right? Through the lens and the experiences that we've had as we've grown up, as we've become adults. That's how we see things. And my experiences are different from yours, or different from somebody else's.
Right.
Not that mine are better or yours are better or worse or whatever. They're just different. But in order to be able to try and understand that, where you're coming from, I've got to be able to. I think the best way to do that is spending time with people, right? And so for me, you got to get to know that person, right? And it can't just be on a superficial level, right? So whether that's asking them, about their life, spending time with them, go have a meal with them, have them to your house, sit down, spend some extended time, ask them about big events in their life that have impacted them or influenced them, things that have gone on. I think that's how you do it, by spending that time with them. I was telling you about the lady Deborah Phillips, right? Block Love Charlotte earlier. That's what she did. She didn't just assume that she knew what these homeless people needed. We all think, well, they probably need some, clothing or some shoes or something to eat or whatever. But she didn't just assume that and say, hey, you take this and this is what you get. She got to know them, and she asked them, what would be helpful to you, right? What is it that would be able to help you in that situation? So that's what's, for me, I think it's trying to get to know someone, spend that time with them. And then once you get to know them better, then you can have true empathy for them. Even though you may not always agree with them, you can at least better understand where they're coming from. Yeah.
Now, before we close, please share with us some thoughts on how we can bring character back into our culture.
Yeah, I think this is a tough one, because I think what happens is we all, no matter whether it's bringing character back into culture or whatever it is, we all want the big splash, right? We all want the thing that is going to make a big impact immediately, as fast as possible, right? The return on investment of something. And I think in terms of character and bringing it back into our culture, I think it's a slow process. I think that first of all, we have to understand that it starts with me. It starts with each of us individually, right? I, as an individual, I have to set that example, and I have to be intentional about sharing that example with other people. I also have to be consistent. Again, we're going back to, I can't say one thing and do another, right? I've got to be consistent and do what I say I'm going to do, and be who I say that I am. And then we've got to share that with the people that are within our own sphere of influence. And it could be very small. It could just be one person. I heard a friend of mine say one time, and I like the way he said this. He said, our video has to match our audio. Right. If you've ever seen those old Japanese films, right, of the kung fu stuff or whatever,
or Japanese anime,
any of those, or if and they're talking on the screen, right, but they're trying to dub in the words. Oh, yes. And so the lips are moving, right, but the words aren't matching up, and so it just doesn't look right. Right. And so I think that's what he means by that. Our actions have to match our words, right? Correct. In order to be that. Because if you're trying to share with somebody, you're talking to them about good character and all these characteristics we've shared today, and then your life doesn't match that, they're not going to give any credit to that, right? It's not going to impact them. And so I think we have to do that. And we can do that in our own homes, our own families, in our own communities, our own neighborhoods, our churches, our service clubs, all these different things. We just have to be willing to do that. Again, it goes back to your thing about being a phoenix, right? I love that, because everybody can be a phoenix, right? Because everybody can impact one person, right? Whoever that is, everybody can impact that one person. They just have to choose to do it.
We're going to end right there. Bert Giles, thank you so much for being on the show. It was an honor and a privilege to have you.
Oh, man, I love being here, and I sure appreciate it, man. And I'm proud of you and all that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you all for watching and for listening. Don't forget, you can follow us wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or Amazon. Thank you for watching and for listening. And always remember, everyone can be a phoenix.